This is our 5th presentation at the Bosnian Pyramid Summer Solstice Tour Conference and Festival 2025.
Woo!
My dear friends from Texas, Ken Cherry, who hosted 4 of my lectures at his conferences, is here today, and I'm really very happy to have him here in Bosnia. And I know that he's been enjoying his trip and his stay here. And it took me years, to drag him over here. He's here finally. He'll be talking to the subject, to the topic that obviously has not something but a lot to do with our major subject, ancient history, ancient civilizations, ancient technology, pyramids as the energy amplifiers and energy machines. We're talking about one very interesting incident that happened in Stephenville, Texas. And he'll give probably an overview of the whole subject, because for years he was a head and very serious investigator of the unidentified and identified flying objects and everything connected to this topic. Ken Cherry.
Thank you, Dr. Sam, and good morning to all of you. I feel like I've met almost all of you during the week. It feels like one big family. And I have a testimonial to make. I typically have 3 to 4 hours a day that I can't speak. My throat is sore or hoarse or raspy. And it's a result of heart surgery that I had with the nurses jamming tubes down my throat. Afterwards, I went to a throat specialist, and he showed me with a camera down my throat that one of my vocal cords was almost completely severed. And so my voice tires if I speak a lot, if I'm under stress, and it happens almost daily. Since I have been here, I've been blabbing my head off to everybody. So I attribute it to 2 things: the wonderful healing power of the tunnels and the positive vibes I get from my extended family here. Thank you so much. I thought I would start with, I'm often asked, why my interest in UFOs and the paranormal and that sort of thing. And my business background is I graduated summa cum laude, I'm happy to say, in finance and economics. I was in the brokerage industry and rose to mid-level management, and then eventually my own firm. When I was about 6 years old, living on a ranch in Texas, back in those days, kids could be gone all day long, and it was a sparsely populated area of the state. My dog and I would walk through this dense coverage of trees, and I looked up low over the horizon. There was this silvery object just going slowly across, in front of me. And of course, at 6 and living largely isolated, I had no idea what it was. And then the next thing I know, there's this other craft coming down at a very steep angle toward it. I learned later it was a military jet. There was some sort of interaction between the silvery object, which was a UFO, and a cigar shape. And the next thing I know, the jet started billowing smoke and the pilot jumped out. The plane crashed. And in those days, you know, children were to be seen, not heard. But when my parents got together with neighbors, all they talked about was rescuing the pilot from the trees. No one else had seen the UFO, apparently, and or didn't speak about it in those days. That was in 1952. President Truman had issued an order that if our pilots couldn't force down UFOs, they were to shoot them down. Major General Chidlaw, who was in charge of all of our air forces, at that time gave an interview in 1952 that someplace in the world we were losing a plane a day trying to force down UFOs. It never worked in our favor. So at that young age, I actually witnessed an event like that, which will be burned in my memory for the rest of my life. Of course, it was one of those kind of things. So I guess I, you know, had that interest sort of innately all my life. When I get older, we went to Roswell, New Mexico, to the museum there. There was a representative and some applications for an organization called MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, which is now over 60 years old. And it's the largest organization for the scientific research of UFOs. That sounded pretty good to me, so I joined, and within 2 years, I became the state director for MUFON in Texas. I was the state director, probably one of the longest standing state directors for almost 15 years. Prior to 2008, we had a number of high-profile UFO cases, and so I got to know a lot of the media folks with magazines, newspapers, TV channels, and so forth. I should get into my slides here, I guess, but for several reasons I'll point out, this became one of the most famous UFO cases of our time. I was on Dateline, and they ranked the top 10 UFO cases in the country, and Stephenville was number 2. I choose not to remember who was number 1. But let's say it was extremely significant. So that's a shot from Larry King. I was on Larry King's show. That show played in Australia. As you know, CNN is seen worldwide. So I'm sure that had a lot to do with you know, the fame of the thing when Dateline and CNN and there are too many channels to name that I was on talking about this. This is a map of the numbers of sighting reports that we were getting, all concentrated in Stephenville and up around the Dallas area, but it almost looks like it's traveling down toward Stephenville. And so, again, our typical month, we have a website that's worldwide that anybody who has a sighting can go on and fill it out, what they saw, where they saw it, the time of day, you know, the east, west, north, whatever. And in Texas, we would get typically about 10 per month. But in November, the numbers started rising. December, it really jumped up. By January, the sightings went through the roof, and they tended to be concentrated in 4 counties. And we have 254 counties in Texas. So that was a pretty significant concentration. You can't read those, but it just gives you an idea of the reports that we were getting and the descriptions they were getting. And these people, you know, it's a pretty small area, but it's also large enough that those folks didn't know each other. Okay? So they're independently confirming what was going on in the air. This is, Stephenville is a town of about 20,000 people. There's a college there, but the main industry, if you want to call it that, is dairy farming. So these are, you know, these are not folks that are subject to flights of fancy. And to find our website, make a report, you could figure that there were probably at least 5 other people who didn't know about our website that didn't report it. And this is a small, you know, this is a group of people in Stephenville reporting, hey, we're seeing this huge UFO. So, again, I had a call from an AP reporter that I know, and she said, we've been hearing these reports about this enormous UFO and this all this UFO activity in this small community of Stephenville and even smaller community down the road named Dublin. And she gave me some of the reports. She said, this is so incredible. And I said, absolutely. And I, as state director, am going down there and interviewing witnesses. And when she put that out on the AP wire, it went all over the world, of course. The newspapers picked it up, magazines, radio stations, my phone rang literally off the hook all day and all night for calls around the world. Japan, Australia, UK, Germany, you name it, with people wanting to know about this. And so we decided that there were too many people to interview that we couldn't go see them individually. So we wanted a place that we could have them come, and then my investigators would take their, their reports. The first place that we could find was a cattle barn that had an auction the night before, and I wasn't happy with that. Thankfully, yeah, you can imagine. Anyway, the smell. Anyway, so I got a call from the Dr. Pepper plant manager in Dublin, which is also one of the concentrated points. And it's the home of the original Dr. Pepper, that's their claim to fame. And they said, we will sponsor you at the Rotary Club and supply all the Dr. Pepper and popcorn for everybody. I said, you can't turn that deal down. So this is a copy of the news article that appeared in the local newspaper in Stephenville. And the original story that made headlines around the world was about Steve Allen. This gentleman was a highly respected businessman in the area. He owned a very large trucking company, over 200 owned and leased trucks. He actually owned 3 airplanes himself as a pilot. And he was out one evening with a couple of friends. One was a long-time employee of American Airlines, and of course knew all the different types of aircraft in the air. And so we took them up on the Rotary Club. I got to this little town. That's the front of the Rotary Club. There was almost no place to park in this small town when I got there. They said the capacity, the most people they had in this Rotary Club was about 200 people. When I got there, there was standing room only, 500 folks in there, and people were coming to the door and couldn't even find a place to stand, so they left. I mean, it's amazing interest. The gentleman in the background with the glasses is Steve Allen. The lady in the foreground is Angelia Joyner, who is the reporter for the local newspaper. I would say half the crowd was media. There was a Japanese correspondent there, someone from the UK. There was another big production company. The producer told me, my boss, we were doing a documentary in New York, And my boss called me up and said, get down to check out this Stephenville thing. So every newspaper in the area, all the major channels, everybody was represented there. And that's me, 35 pounds heavier, thankfully. And my investigation team. Now I think these two guys at the back were from the Dr. Pepper security folks, and they sneaked in the photo. But as you can see, I came with quite a few investigators, and we still could not interview all the witnesses that showed up. As I said, this is a college town. We didn't have any, college students that made representations or said they saw any. None. It was all middle age and older folks, and these are all, feet on the ground, no nonsense folks. And I've been investigating for almost 40 years, and when I started, people were afraid to talk because they didn't want to be ridiculed, and they didn't want to go public if they did. But by this time, thankfully, things have changed where people are more free to come out and talk and not worry about it. These were all very inquisitive folks. They wanted to know, what was it that we saw? There are two major military bases next to this area and a regional airport. These folks are used to seeing military aircraft, commercial aircraft, all the time. That flies over their area. So they knew that it wasn't conventional aircraft, and they wanted to know what it was. This is one of the rooms that we were supposed to be just interviewing witnesses, but as you can see, the media and everybody else crowded in there. I mean, it was such a huge crowd. We couldn't control it all, so we just kind of gave up. This gentleman was a retired Air Force radar specialist, and he had given a pretty credible report. This is a lady who is an emergency room nurse, and she said she was a military brat and lived all over the world, seeing every kind of aircraft. Her husband was aerodynamic. He was a design engineer for aircraft, and he worked for the local defense plant. And he said, I've even worked on black budget projects. I know it wasn't one of ours. They were walking a big, forget, we'll call it Doberman pincher or whatever. But they were walking, and they said this dog is usually fearless, and suddenly it started whining and tried to crawl under a truck. And they went, what's going on? And they looked up, and this enormous UFO was right over them. No sound, nothing. And just looming over them, and took off. These are the kind of credible witnesses that we had. This is a law enforcement officer. His name is Leroy Gayton, and he's an elected official. I don't know what's going on with my hair that day, but we're about the same height. But you don't want to mess with Leroy. When he has a warrant for a murderer or a rapist or a kidnapper, he brings them down. I mean, this man is tough, no nonsense. And he was one of our first witnesses as well. And he was not shy about it. He wasn't worried about his popularity, as a matter of fact, he did get reelected after this. But anyway, a lot of politicians would not take that kind of a chance with their political life, Reputation. Yeah, reputation. And so I'm just trying to get the point across as to how credible our witnesses were. Now, I'll get into, this is more or less in two parts. What I'm showing you is the public presentation, okay? But I'm going to make a statement that kind of alludes to the second half before I get into the non-public stuff. For some reason, let me back up. Taking statements from witnesses is one thing toward the, proving or disproving. But the second and an equally as important part is having an expert at making FOIA requests, Freedom of Information requests, and being a radar specialist. I had a radar specialist assigned to me, to my team, that had worked at White Sands. He worked on a lot of government programs and so forth. Highly, highly qualified. Suddenly, the board of MUFON pulled him from me and told him only report directly to us, not to Ken anymore. And I was under constant fire from critics, and they, some Canadian guys. Well, I don't know what these idiots are. Clearly, the aliens were here trying to contact the president, whose ranch was right there in the area. Well, what they didn't know is the president wasn't even there. So I don't think these guys came from another galaxy without a calendar of the president's, Yeah, no. So anyway, we had a lot of armchair critics, and the reporter with the little newspaper ended up being a big critic too. She was saying, what's taking MUFON so long to find proof? I've got tons of proof. Well, what she had were reports. That's it. She didn't know the difference. So suddenly I lose my expert, and I'm taking fire, and the MUFON spokesperson is going on radio programs with this reporter who's knocking us at our work. I don't know what the heck was going on. Fortunately, I was contacted by the UFO hunters, producer David Pavoni, gentleman in the middle, my chief investigator. We had 41 investigators, so my chief investigator, Steve Hudgens, is to the left, and that's me again, 35 pounds fat. Anyway, they said we'd like to come down and help you with your investigation to do our final episode of the season. And would you mind our help? And I said, please come down. They brought with them money. And they said, what do you need? I said, I need a FOIA expert. I need a radar expert. And there was, the place turned into a zoo. So I'm trying to think his name, Fox. He'll come to me after tomorrow or something. Anyway, James Fox. James Fox came into town and he offered $5,000 to anybody, All of a sudden, everybody wanted money, And the UFO Hunters was desperate to get something, to really do a whiz bang on their show. And there was a gentleman that had taken photos from his front porch that he claimed was the UFO. And so Pavoni was desperate to get it. The guy wanted $10,000. Anyway, so we also needed a photographic. Oh, that's Bill Burns. He was the star of the show. The first day they were there. They had a craft table, that just had a sheet around it. And I went in to get a soda or something, and Bill comes in. Who's the star of this show? Is it you or me? Because if it's you, I'm going home. And I said, no, you're the star, but this is my investigation. Thank you. And we walked out, and all the people were standing there, just staring. They were just cracking up. Nobody talks to Bill like that. Anyway, we did 2 more shows together, so we got along great. So the UFO Hunters hired Bill Puckett, who was a retired meteorologist from the Weather Service and had been an investigator for MUFON. There's Bill, good man. Very serious scientist though. At any rate, his first task was to research the initial sighting by Steve Allen and his two friends. And Steve described it, the top there, red line, is they were standing outside and they saw these lights coming at a high rate of speed across the sky. And while they were standing there, he said it looked like, well, they didn't know what it was. And so while they're standing there discussing it, it came back. And it was being chased by F-16s and Afterburner. And he said, it looked like he said, that time we could see it. It looked like a craft that was a quarter mile wide and about a mile long. And he said, it looked like it just got tired of toying with the F-16s and just accelerated, it made it look like they were standing still. Well, when that story went out, the Air Force poo-pooed it, said, no, we didn't have any aircraft out there. And we'd like to come in to one of your meetings and explain to everybody what it was. It was a mirage caused by two commercial jets coming close to each other. Right. You're going to get the same mirage from 4 different counties. You know, this thing was seen all over the place. And so when we initially sent in requests for radar reports, we were denied by the government. And they thought they had shut us down. So Bill Puckett, we couldn't get commercial, we couldn't get military radar. Bill Puckett knew how to get the FAA radar. Now, I know this has a laser on it someplace.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It doesn't really work on the screen, just point.
Oh, okay. Well, you can see the target. It says target down on the left side. That is the first screen grab that we got of this UFO, and exactly where Steve Allen and his friends said it was at the time they said it was. Now, later, we were able to get military and commercial radar, and we confirmed this thing was anywhere from 2 to 6 football fields long. Huge, enormous. Oh.
No, it doesn't work on the screen.
It doesn't? Okay, thank you anyway. And of course, it showed up where the witnesses said, but it was also tracked at speeds of 0, in other words, just looming, like some of the witnesses said, to over 2,000 miles an hour. Interesting, breaking this sound barrier, never once making a sound. And that was consistent throughout everybody's testimony, was that no sound was made. This is the gentleman I was telling you about earlier. He was a Micmac Indian from Canada working there in the oil fields. And he had what he said were pictures of this UFO. And that the UFO hunters were so hot to purchase. My chief investigator and I told Dave, don't give him $10,000. Maybe, we're trying to talk him down. I said, give him $5,000. Let us analyze it. And if it's, real, then give him the rest. So Dave and David went into a room at a local radio station where it was supposed to be a neutral party. Anyway, they went into a conference room, came out, and David Carone was so happy. He was counting all his money, 10 grand. Pavoni had given him the whole 10 grand. I mean, oh, good. But I was happy to see David get the money, because as he's going out, I heard his son say, "So we can get the brakes on the truck fixed now, right, Dad?" So, it went to a good cause. This is David's house. I went out to see where he had made the recording. These are the pictures that he took. The UFO hunters bought rights to these photos, and they bought the camera as well, and the 10 grand deal. Linda Moulton Howe got a hold of a bootleg copy of these and put them on our website, and she said, "This is proof that aliens are trying to communicate with us." And somebody from the production company called her up and said, you can't put those out on their website, we own them. And she insisted on seeing the contract, but as soon as she did, she took it down. So, good for her. This is Dr. Bruce Maccabee that I requested. He's probably he's passed now, but he was one of the top physical optical people in the country. And I don't think it's a secret. He did work for intelligence agencies, but I trusted him implicitly. He was a good man. So he analyzed the photos and the camera. It was a JVC with 32 times zoom. It had night vision, and that was his conclusion. It was in night vision mode at the maximum zoom. So what caused these photos was pulsation on an object, pulsation in night mode, and an object at great distance unable to focus. So what it turned out to be is it is physically impossible for a human being to hold a camera completely steady, period, because it's just your normal vibration. And David had done that, but what he was focusing on was the star Sirius, and so that was a 10 grand lesson right there. They used these photos on the UFO hunters anyway. They paid for them enough. Now, what people didn't realize, there had been over 9 different production companies in Stephenville. UK, BBC, Japanese channel, Australia, I think, but all the major networks have done something. The History Channel, CNN, CBS, NBC, you name it. And they've all come out, Netflix was the last one, and they did an episode on Steve Allen. But they all go back and they interview Steve Allen and the constable and a couple of other people. And so they did the same story over and over and over again. What people didn't know, and we didn't want people to know because of all the hysteria and the carnival atmosphere around this, is that there were many UFOs over that entire year, and a lot of them were small orb type things. Orange, white, sometimes they would flash, sometimes they would be in formation, sometimes it would be one that might split into several into one. So that continued all year, and so did our investigation. So there was another big wave of UFOs in October that year, on the 21st and again on the 23rd. Now, during the course of our investigation, we took dozens of radar studies. Okay, so I'm just showing you a few here. This is, if you can see those circular returns there, those are UFOs, small ones. Oh. And they were reported the correct number, the correct direction, the correct time that the witnesses said they were. And this brownfield MOA is military operating area. They actually flew through military operating bases and so forth. The largest military base in the country is located right there. A little bit more to say about that. Here's another of that wave on the 23rd. Witnesses see 3 big orange lights hovering above the ground, and then again, witnesses see a row of lights traveling horizontally to the northwest. And as you can see, there's 2, 4, 6, 7, and then another close to the military operating area there. So 8. So when people reported there were 3, they were on the side where that was what they would see. They couldn't see the ones on the other side. But we did have reports from different directions that showed more. Amazing. Now, 3 law enforcement officers were also witnesses. They were active and they did not want to be public. They did appear on camera with their faces blotted out, their voices changed at once, but they were in different areas of the city. 2 policemen and 1 constable deputy. They all knew each other. It's a very small community, so all of the law enforcement people know each other by name. So they got together and they said, "You won't believe what I saw." "No, you won't believe what I saw." "No, my God, you're not gonna." So the 3 of them had seen this enormous UFO at some point during their shifts. One policeman was in his cruiser doing traffic check, if you know what I mean, from probably behind a billboard or something. Anyway, he said all of a sudden everything got completely quiet, and he said, "What's going on?" He looked up and he said, "There is this enormous UFO just looming right over him." He said, "I didn't know what to do, so I took my radar gun and pointed it at it." He said, "The first reading I got was, I don't know, 13, 14 miles an hour, I think he said. And then, boom, it was gone. And it accelerated so fast that, that was the only reading he got was when it first. So, another one actually had an encounter, but he was threatened by his captain that you cannot, they all were, but this one in particular had a dramatic encounter. That officer has retired this year, and I finally got his story. But more of a visual, physical encounter with a being. So anyway, that's the UFO from different angles. All right, that is the official account. And now I will give you some things behind the scenes. Starting with I don't know how to put it, but having questions about my own organization for pulling some of my most important assets and allowing their spokesperson to go on radio shows with someone who was, bad-mouthing my team. I began to look into what's going on. I can't emphasize enough how much over the years' time my phone rang, because I was above the fold on a major newspaper 5 days out of 7 one time, and they actually put my phone number in there. So nobody asked me. Anyway, I was getting calls from all over the world. And I got a phone call once early on, and it said, "Are you Mr. Cherry who's heading up the investigation, blah, blah, blah?" Yes. Well, let me close my door. And then the person would come back and say, I have something to tell you that I can't go public with, but, could help you. And they would tell me something, and I went, that's interesting, but, I don't know this person. I don't know if this is real. But over time, I kept getting more of these kind of calls from different only gentlemen. And they would claim that, I can't tell you what agency I'm with and so forth, but here's something you need to know. And there began to be an area of overlapping in the stories, so that they were confirming, these people who didn't know each other were confirming the information that I was getting. And I found out a lot about my own organization and the government's attempt to cover up information regarding UFOs, alien contact, back engineering, actually alien bases here on Earth, and much, much more. So we had 4 witnesses that claimed alien contact in some regard. Instead of Steve Allen's sighting, which is, you can find it all over TV. I started my book with an account of a dairy farmer who came in. He was about 39 years old. You can't make a living off of 8 or 10 cows. So these folks get up, they tend to their herd before breakfast, go to their day job, and then they come back and they tend to them again. So it's long days, hard work, not much reward. He said, I'd come home, I was going out to the barnyard, and just as I opened the gate, about to open the gate to go to the barnyard, something happened. He said, I woke up 2 hours later, missing time. I had, and he said, I've been sleeping horribly and having nightmares, and he said, it's finally come back to me. I was abducted into this large ship. He said, I remember laying on a table, and there was a creature and a military officer talking. He said, but they weren't talking, it was all telepathy, and I could hear them in my head. And the military officer turned to this creature and says, how much will he remember? And the creature says, as much or as little as you want him to. So, I'll tell you, that is not the only account that we had that this was a joint operation. Okay? So, that's the one I lead off with in the book. One lady called me up. She sent me a photograph. I didn't add it. I probably should have. But she had gone into town with her daughter to buy groceries and so forth. And they came home. It was late. And they lived right across this road from a wooded area. And she said, I was bringing in groceries. I thought my daughter was right behind me. And I go back out the car. She's missing. And she said, I'm frantic. And, I'm calling all of her friends, and I'm driving up and down the road to see if she started walking someplace. Came back home, and it was some hours or 2 later. She said, I saw this craft rise up above the tree line and then take off. She said, by the time I got my phone out, it had already accelerated. And what she sent me was clearly something that was ascending at a high rate of speed, but it was also far enough away you couldn't make out what it was. But clearly, this was an object because the stars in the background were standing still. Nothing. So it wasn't the motion of the camera or something like that. Any rate, she said then her daughter came stumbling out of the woods and said she had been abducted. but she said she's been like she has PTSD ever since then. And it's changed her personality. All right, one witness said this huge UFO was so low over his property that he could actually see beings in the windows, port windows. And he was interviewed a lot. He had quite a few. I think he had a number of witnesses along with him. They didn't want it to be public, but they all confirmed his story. Let me move on here. The officer that just retired this year was finally able to tell his story, and this has just been out for a month or so. He was on patrol about 3 a.m. in the morning, and he said he saw this glowing humanoid on top of a building. And he called for backup, and he decided not to wait for them. So he climbed up on top of the building, chasing this creature, and suddenly it just disappeared. And they had cars around the building and EMT there, the fire department, everything. So it was a big incident. And when he was called in, he told his captain what he had seen. That's when his captain said, "You're ruined as a policeman if you go public with that, because you can never be used as a expert witness for a crime or something like that anymore. You'll always be the UFO guy." So anyway, this area, it turns out, has a history of UFO sightings going back into the 1800s. One of the city councilmen found in their archives a newspaper story describing in the where the heck is it?
1891.
Yeah, 1891. The inhabitants of this little area said they witnessed what appeared to be a burning bale of hay going through the air. Now, if you've never seen an aircraft or anything like that, it might be the way you would describe a glowing UFO orb or some small thing. They said it crashed into a building and destroyed the buildings, destroyed the UFO. It probably was on, in peril before that. And they found the strange parchment they thought was, that had hieroglyphics on it, I guess is the way they described the writing. And the story stopped there. We don't know what happened to any of the evidence or whatever. But my point is, we found many, many UFO sightings back at least more than 100 years. And frankly, according to one of my inside folks, there's a reason that this area is ringed by massive military presence. Okay, and so I had to write my book as a novel because I submitted it to 3 publishers. They all said, this has names, places, dates, times, all this stuff. You can't publish this. It'd be too much backlash for everybody. So rewrite it as a novel. So I changed the name, I guess. MUFON is Aqua, Alien Quest USA, Mark Slade is me, and there's a couple of characters in there that also are very real, Drake and Gladys. They're both people I knew very well, both CIA. Drake was a very, very high and influential member of the CIA. He started out as an OSS officer under MacArthur during World War II. And they viewed a number of crash sites with bodies and even live ones. And through that exposure, Drake got into this highly compartmentalized area of the CIA and rose through the ranks over the years. And he told me that he had become one of 3 men panel to final approval for black budget programs. And one year, the proposal in front of them was so huge that they refused to sign it. And said, so they called in this 4-star general and said, look, there's no oversight on this. We don't know what it's going for. It's a massive increase over years past. We're not going to sign off on it until we know where the money's going. And so he said they took them to this enormous hangar. He wouldn't tell me where it was, but we could probably all guess. Anyway, he said we went inside, and there were all sizes of flying saucers, is what he called them. And the general turns to him and said, that's where the money's going. He said, we've had a functional secret space program since the mid-60s. 60s, okay? And so they have kept this from us all this time. Now, I have a new insider who tells me they don't go through this process anymore. The Fed creates an account, types in some numbers, and funds these programs without going through Congress or anybody. You ever wonder why the Fed has never been audited? So, anyway, the amount of cover-up and deceit, because, well, I've heard the arguments on both sides. Disclosure, not disclosure, and they're both pretty powerful. But the bottom line is they think this is an existential threat to humanity if we know the truth. And one of the truths that my whistleblowers have told me is that many of these are not extraterrestrials. These are non-human terrestrial beings. And they have been here since before the dawn of man. And if they weren't benign, they could have wiped us out, when we were back in caves. And so we do have protectors in that sense. Why so many UFO crashes? One scientist that contacted me that had worked at S4 on Area 51, he said they did work with aliens and they did work with anti-grav and they did back engineer crafts that were downed and or contributed. But he had worked on a program during the Reagan administration on SDI. And he said that SDI was successful. And the point was to have a defense against hostile extraterrestrials. You hear about crashes all through, the last 50 years or so. These are not crashes. Many of them we are alerted to by benign or protector types, which most of them are. And they tell us which ones are hostile, and we shoot them down. This scientist I spoke with had also been assigned to research, he said, in his career, 7 different UFOs. And while we were having a conversation, he said he was called away. Even though he's retired, they still called on to go to Japan. They had retrieved a UFO from the Sea of Japan, and he was one of the scientists asked to come over and look through it. And the only feedback I got from him when he returned, he says, that it had a wall of water in the craft, and we didn't understand why. It wasn't gelatin, it wasn't flowing, it was just water just standing there. And so I keep thinking about Valery's presentation and Dr. Sam's presentation about the importance of water in creating energy. And I don't know, but apparently it's important to alien people as well. Which reminds me, we had a case where a number of witnesses watched a UFO park over a lake, and suddenly a stream of water started going up into the craft. And they said it was a small craft. They said the water that for the period of time it was going into the craft would have easily filled it up very quickly. So obviously inside they must manipulate dimensions as well as, you know, having this incredible technology to fly beyond light speed. All right. Back to the military. There was a young first lieutenant Air Force officer that took a lot of interest in our investigation, and he had already decided he wasn't going to be a career officer. He was getting out. And he confided in me that they saw UFOs on their radar there all the time, and they were ordered not to talk about it. And of course, his boss, this major, was the one who made up the story about it being a mirage. Once they knew we had radar data proving there were F-16s there, they went, oh, okay. You know, they backtracked all over the place. But they went to great lengths to try to obfuscate this. So, I don't know how many of you have heard of Jim Mars. He was probably one of the greatest investigative reporters of all time. He investigated...
My friend.
Yes.
My friend.
He investigated the Kennedy assassination. Jim and I were very close friends. We went to the same high school, but he was a couple years older than me. He said he investigated that for years. It was turned down 40 times on his manuscript. And he kept tweaking it, and finally, when it was accepted, it went to #1 New York Times bestseller the first week and stayed there for weeks. Now, over his investigative career, Jim garnered many, many reliable sources. And since Jim didn't live very far away, my phone was busy all the time, a lot of people were calling him about the Stephenville event, and he would say, call Ken, he's in charge of that. It's not my thing. So anyway, one day, and Jim would call me from time to time. So one day he called and he said, look, one of my most reliable informants wants to talk to you. And he has always been good through the years. And I said, of course, I want to talk to him. So this is another man that I gained as a source of secret information. But anyway, what the gentleman said was, Gordon Cooper, backtrack a sec. Gordon Cooper, as you may know, the astronaut, wanted the UN to have a special group to study UFOs and ETs, and Gordon Cooper had told a couple of his encounters. And so I think officially, at least at first, the UN denied, well, we're not going to do that. They actually did do that. And so this informant tells me, everybody's all stirred up about all this UFO activity. We're going to have there's going to be a meeting at the UN to discuss it. So he tells me later that 7 great powers were there, but the representatives from each of those countries and the intelligence that were in this compartmentalized area that knew about UFOs and our relationship with ETs and back engineering, all that sort of thing. So anyway, the American representative, the bottom line was that the others are unhappy with our pace of disclosure, and that we should start preparing our population because it's going to happen whether they want it to or not. And so there are people in our government, powerful people, and I write about some of my book, who want to disclose, everything, and there are powerful people who don't want to disclose. And then there's a third faction, and they're called the others, that say, we've been here, you share the planet with us. We're the top of the food chain. You're in the bottom of the ocean, you're on the moon, you're shooting rockets into space. We can't hide from you anymore. We don't see why we should have to. So, powers that be, tell your people, or what we're going to do, like in Stephenville and Phoenix, Arizona, and a couple of high-profile places like that. We're just going to start showing up over these major cities, and you're not going to be able to deny us. So, you know, get ready. And so I thought everybody here would be, you know, kind of pleased to hear that. I think most of us think we want disclosure. And so the folks now that are coming out, the David Grush, Lou Elizondo, the Navy pilots, all these folks that are being called whistleblowers, they are not whistleblowers.
Yeah.
They are government tools. They are out there spreading the word, and they're only able to say exactly what they are allowed to say. That's all. And Lou has admitted it. Yeah, there's limits I can't go past, you know. But they're more so than a TV program or something like that. The government is hoping to this soft disclosure through these credible people will help prepare everyone. And so that's where we are, but I think we're not far from disclosure. Now, some societies are doing more to prepare, and others use COVID and 9/11 to set up mechanisms for controlling the population because they're afraid that people will go nuts. I mean, you know, there'll be insurrection. Listen, if people break windows and loot and burn over political differences, just imagine what this might do, okay? They lose confidence in their government, they lose confidence in the Lord, you know, the creator they pray to. Everything is thrown into disarray. According to the folks who don't want to disclose, they think this is a real threat to humanity. Who knows? So, in closing, I will say, Ben Rich, who is the CEO of Lockheed Skunk Works, they came up with the stealth fighter, and they've done a lot of secret things. Listen, if kids are crawling on these stealth aircrafts at air shows and stuff like that, you know they've got 2 or 3 other generations already working, you know, not to mention back engineered craft. So that's the other thing. Probably at least half of the sightings that people have, it's our own technology. It's been back engineered, and some of it was back engineered from donated craft, some was back engineered from downed alien craft. I'll give you one more insight. I have a source who was a NASA employee on his paycheck, but his real job as a scientist is the back engineer. And he said there's a reason after Roswell all these years we're still back engineering. He said because all of these different, and he was aware of 14 different extraterrestrials, he said, species that visit the Earth on a regular basis. He said, but all their science is not the same. These are not like combustion engines where, you know, you can pretty much know how one works if you study the other. He said, there's some, he described one, he said that it's so advanced AI, it's you can't tell that, the difference between that and a sentient being. Ben Rich said at a lecture before he died that we already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do. Yep. He also said there was a flaw in Einstein's theory. They found it, and it is possible to go faster than the speed of light. Now, at that time, a gentleman who was an engineer was at that meeting who became the international director for MUFON, Jan Harzan, was there, and he said, I followed Ben out to his car where he was packing to leave, and I said, Ben, were you serious? We can go faster than the speed of light? We can take E.T. home? He said, yes. He said, how does that work? And he says, well, how fast is the speed of thought? Basically, one of the crafts that I mentioned, you can't tell the difference if it's live. Go inside, there's nothing. No control panels, nothing, no screens, no refrigerator, nothing, you know. And the pilot gets in and it forms a symbiotic relationship to the pilot. The pilot doesn't have to plot a course, he just thinks it, boom. Sirius B, you're there, bang. And he said, yeah, we'll never figure out how that works. And we've never had a pilot who could do it, you know. But so some of these things will never be discovered because we just don't have the capacity to understand it. Well, that's it. Thank you. Wow. Q&A. Yeah, okay. I'll take